Welcome. You're watching episode 92 of Regional Wrap, pre-recorded on the afternoon of Wednesday, the 28th of June. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Community Needs and Aspirations, is my guest, Ross Andrews, Mayor of Yarrabah Aboriginal Shire. Ross has been the serving mayor since he was appointed in 2016. He was also the former CEO of both Yarrabah and Napparim Aboriginal Shires. He holds a business degree, majoring in entrepreneurship, human resources management from James Cook University. As mayor, Ross is across all management portfolios of his council. He helps coordinate the council's focus on using resources to build digital skills for young people and engaging them with the community. Ross is also involved in the development of Yarrabah Township Planning Scheme, enabling good decision making and future use of land in the Yarrabah area, and other strategic frameworks that contribute to the well-being of the residents. He is also chairperson of the Yarrabah's Leaders Forum, which sets the strategic direction of Yarrabah, and he is a passionate volunteer of the Yarrabah Seahawk Sports Club. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks, Bill, and good evening to yourself and to your viewers out there. Great to be on the show tonight.
Thank you for coming. I know your time's pretty precious, and not just in Yarrabah, but you seem to have to be here, there and everywhere across the state and down in Canberra as well. So you're a fairly busy man.
Yeah, it's been like that for the last few years, but I enjoy doing what I'm doing, doing a lot of work internally in the community, but also getting out and working hard and visiting Brisbane, Canberra, and a few other regions around the country, and working as hard as we can to make a difference and to provide a better quality of life for First Nations people in Yarrabah.
If you could tell us about maybe your misspent youth and where you grew up and your journey to become Mayor of Yarrabah.
Yeah, well, but before I start, I might just acknowledge the country that I'm having this video conference from is the Gulgurji people, and further to the south are the Yidinji people. And I live, work and play in this community, this beautiful community of Yarrabah. My connection to country is through stolen generation. It's both my grandfathers on my mum and dad's side. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Kukuyalanji man, and on my mother's father's side is my connection to the Kukujangan tribe that is in Western Far North Queensland. But I live and work and play here in Yarrabah, and I really enjoy it. Most of my childhood was actually growing up in the Yarrabah community. I went to school here at the primary school in Yarrabah with many of our fellow students and families here, and the primary school is, goes up to years 1 to 7. And the primary school that we have here is probably just a bit over 50 years old. So, I enjoy going to the Yarrabah primary school. I also went to the Yarrabah secondary, 8 to 10, which is on the southern corridors of the community. And back in those days, we used to walk to school. We didn't have a bus service. We didn't have bitumen or sealed roads. And many of us in the community actually walked barefoot to many of our schools. It was a great period though, and really enjoyed doing schooling here. And years 11 and 12, we were sent away like other students down to Warwick. There used to be an Anglican school down there that some of our Yarrabah students continued their education into the senior years of 11 and 12. And then once I finished my primary schooling and secondary schooling days, I came back and worked as a 16-year-old when the Department of Aboriginal Affairs were managing the community, and we're looking at transitioning the title deeds back to communities. So back in the 84, 86 era, when the federal member for Kennedy, Mr. Bob Catter Sr., was the state minister back then, but he handed over the title deeds back over to the Yarrabah community, namely Yarrabah Council, to take responsibility of the land tenure in the community. So it was a form of aspirational self-management process that we went through of the transfer of the title deed. But it was an era where the transition really came with no resource. So they wanted to transfer the responsibility of Aboriginal local government into the local advisory council of the day. And we, back in the days, there were older leaders than myself, but I was only a young chap that's finished year 12, getting a taste of the work, being exposed to work and work conditions. But there were many other leaders that really led the campaign, but also were their struggle and their fight for self-management, self-determination started many years before that. So there's a moment in the history of this community when Yarrabah were transitioning into some form of self-management for the community. So it was pretty tough back then, but when the state government handed over responsibility, they didn't really have a real transition plan. So we, the leaders of the day did the best they can under those circumstances. So I was pretty fortunate.
One of the things too with state government, when they hand over responsibility, a lot of times they don't give enough authority and funding. That's some of the shortcomings when they hand over responsibility to councils at times. Yeah,
well, Yarrabah was only one community. I mean, there were other communities in the state also were transitioning from former reserves under the state government, and we all got affected by not having a really robust transition plan. So everybody did the best they can under those circumstances, because during that era there were communities asking for a bit more community control, and to be given that with no real resource or funding or investment or real strategic transition was challenging. But in saying that, a lot of the communities really had to work hard over the last few years, decades, to really bring their communities up to a situation where we have, did the best we can.
One of the things about Yarrabah is it's fairly unique in the fact that it's so almost co-located with one of the biggest regional cities in Queensland. It's collated with Cairns, so basically people can stand on this side of Trinity Bay and look across the Yarrabah, and it doesn't seem that far, but it's a 60-kilometre road trip just about. Do you think that's a handicap that should be looked into in regards to being overcome somewhere in the near future? Because it is a bit of a detriment in regards to progress and making the best of the opportunities that exist in Cairns?
Thank you, Bill, for that question, because when you look at Yarrabah and its proximity to Cairns, it's about, as you mentioned, about an hour's drive inland across the Trinity Inlet and over the range. But also in a straight line, I'm led to believe it's about 17 kilometres to the next regional town. And the classification methodology that the federal government for us has been a bit of a challenge over the last few years in terms of our classification. We're classified as outer regional, but under the ARIA and the CIFA index, we need a little bit more work to be done in that space because our level of disadvantage is similar to those who are in remote or isolated regions. And I really sympathise with those communities that are in remote and isolated Australia because, the cost of living and food security is pretty challenging for them. But for us out here, I know that we've always wanted to work with a demographer to have a robust, cogent argument around our classification. And, we've come up with a concept that maybe Yarrabah has been strategically neglected by those classifications. And we'll continue to advocate and continue to put a really good business case in terms of our mode of classification. But yeah, we have all the negative indicators that really skews in the wrong direction, similar to other communities, where there's high rates of unemployment, socioeconomic standard. There's educational issues, there's antisocial issues, there's even economic issues, where we're not capturing as much as the economy as we should be, given our limited investment through high impact investment. So if we can manage to catch 1 to 5% of the amount of funding that's leaked out of Yarrabah, I mean, that would help us in some way. There's really potential out here to leverage off tourism and the tourism market of Cairns and far north Queensland. But yeah, we do have those negative indicators that are challenging, but we also have really good opportunities and really good things that are happening in our communities as well.
I'll just throw up a map of Yarrabah so people get a picture of the area you're dealing with. Now, of course, Cairns is just over this area here, and this is Yarrabah running down the eastern side of the peninsula there. But the main population is centred in the northern section and a little bit around here. But you've got a long stretch of land to deal with. But the other thing is, people look at it, you've got at least you've got some sandy beaches, which Cairns certainly can't boast about.
Yeah, there's a really a lot of pristine area around Yarrabah's boundaries, around that the area you just displayed there. So, and a lot of natural beauty as well. So, there's a lot of good beaches and a lot of good recreational areas that community really enjoy. And we're very close to the Green and Fitzroy Island, plus also close to the Great Barrier Reef as well. So we have a bit of beauty out here that we really, we're really proud of. Sorry?
Needs to be capitalised on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of potential, and I mean, a few years ago, the traditional owner, we have two traditional owner groups here. They've been given their native title rights. One's the northern PBC and the southern PBC down the bottom end, and Yarrabah Council's going through a planning process where we've flipped it and we said, you tell us what you want in the planning scheme, and we'll look at trying to consider and accommodate your wishes. And not many Indigenous shires are doing that, where traditional owners are actually telling the council what would they like in the planning scheme. So we sort of flipped it. And those economic and cultural opportunities that are there would be guided by them. And they can really engage and participate in some economic opportunity as well. So, yeah, there's plenty of potential there.
The other thing you've got is a bit of deep water as well.
We do have on the
which Cairns doesn't have.
on the east coast there, yeah, not far from one of our beautiful beaches here. There's been talk for many years around a deep water port there. That's sort of been a bit quiet as of recently, but governments and I think it was the Cairns Port Authority back then, they did look at some deep water port down in the eastern area of our beaches. And, there's a bit of history there as well with traditional owners. But yeah, there's so much potential for this little narrow shire to really have a go and make a go of things.
One of the issues you had just recently is water quality. Can you tell us a little bit? Well, where does your water come from at the moment, and what's the issue there? And I did see something in the Cairns Post that the Cairns Regional Council is looking or offering to connect you up to their system. But what's your current situation?
Yeah, main water source really comes from our aquifer that is down in the not far out of town. The aquifer normally gets full every monsoon period. So we believe there's enough water down there to really continue with our supply to the town. We're working with the state government on trying to ensure that we do have a sustainable water supply to community, and we do have aging infrastructure that is a challenge and has been a challenge for us. But we're progressing those discussions and those talks around our water supply. A maintain a water supply is really it meets the drinking water guidelines for community. We did a few months ago. We did detect some issues around the quality of water in some of our building and facilities out here, which is being tested on a regular basis to ensure that we meet the guidelines and that it's safe. So I know we're working closely with the government around testing, around the education, the health facilities, and a few of the council buildings around town, as well as community residents. So it will be a rigorous, thorough testing process. But all indications to date is it's looking pretty positive for us as we speak. But we will continue to work with the authorities about our town supply. But we believe we don't have a Yarrabah water plan at the moment, so we were trying to embark on getting governments to really look at our long-term needs. And we welcome the support that was provided through the media from the Cairns Regional Council. But there's a lot more work internally for us to do at Yarrabah with regards to their water and their situation. And I think there's enough creeks around here as well to try and do some testings. But up until we get our strategic mapping of water supply through a Yarrabah water plan, we can then start working with government about how to best do it, plus implement it. But at the moment, we're working through the progress of, meeting community expectations and community supply. So, yeah, it's progressing in a positive way.
Sometimes it's an issue with the distribution system of water rather than the quality of the reservoir sort of thing. I know I was down in Melbourne working with a plumber, and we found individual areas that were built in probably the 80s. A lot of houses had problems because of the quality of the copper pipe used, and they actually leached sulfides. So there's all sorts of problems that can go wrong with plumbing.
Yeah, well, the aging infrastructure doesn't help where there's plumbing fixtures. And when water is left stagnant, that's when the buildup of these other chemicals can happen. If you're not regularly flushing your water supply, it can cause problems. But for us at Yarrabah, I think what's really saved us, I guess, in terms of or helped us really was not in a bad way, but the overcrowding situation where many of the housing are overcrowded, but they're regularly using the water system. So the water is being flushed on a regular basis. But it's the areas that are not being used and flushed regularly that can be a bit of a concern. So water really needs to be flushed all the time with all these fittings. And Yarrabah, the people out there, in terms of the residents, have been doing that regular flushing around town.
Yarrabah's had a fairly interesting history in regards to the arrivals into Yarrabah from different areas over the time it's been established. I believe Indigenous people from as far away as Fraser Island actually came up and were located there. So can you give us a bit of background history on Yarrabah and its sort of formation and its changing of its citizens over the period of years?
Yeah, I was only looking at the timeline before with the chronology of leadership in Yarrabah, and I think in 1792 Yarrabah was established as an Anglican mission, but it's always been the home of the Kunganji people as first nations of this particular land. Then further to the south are the Yirinji people. But when the church came, they brought a few other missionaries, and as well as I think there were some South Sea Islanders also to come and help with the missionaries. And then there's been many of the stolen generation also came to Yarrabah. The government and the church institutions used Yarrabah as a former penal colony, and many of our families were brought from other parts of the state and the country, and further to the south, as you mentioned, Fraser Island. So Yarrabah's got a mixture of primary traditional owners, as well as the adoption of the stolen generation families, and a little bit of history on the South Sea Island community as well. So, it's a beautiful community with a blend of different nationalities or nations, and I think it's rich. It continues to be rich in its culture and the people, and the rich history of the community is also on display at the Menmeni Museum. So yeah, there's a bit of rich history here, and some of it is a sad history as well. But we've come together, and we're doing the best we can under those circumstances, where those who are primary traditional owners, those have been dispossessed from their country. And I know the small South Sea Island community is very proud of their heritage as well, and there's a bit of blend, amongst us all here. My great grandparents were actually born here as well. So yeah, there's a mixture of community in this community, but I think other communities have a similar, similar situation as well.
I'll just flick up a screen of the population. These are from the census 2016 and 2021. The population is fairly steady, and the number of dwellings has gone up a little bit. The number of families has gone up a little bit. The birth rate seems to suggest there's about 60 odd children born each year, to give you the point between the census, 200 to 300 children in a 5-year period. The indications are that people also move out of Yarrabah as well. So if that population is remaining around about that 2,500, do a number of people from Yarrabah eventually go to Cairns or somewhere and buy their own house and take up permanent residence over there? What's the sort of flow rate of people in and out of Yarrabah?
Yeah, well, the ABS data says about 2,900 people, but anecdotally we say, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people. Anecdotally, so there's a floating population as well. We have a very young population in Yarrabah, where many of our young mums and dad sort of starts off a family. Many of the economies really are like a welfare economy. We do have a couple of hundred jobs around the community with not only local government, but the health sector and the education and the policing sector that has job, and a small few businesses around town. But there's also the NGO sector. So many of our people do, because of our overcrowding situation, also have, mobilised into Cairns and other regions, either for educational or employment opportunities. And because we have challenges around our housing and our homelessness situation. So yeah, we do have that floating population, and Yarrabah and a few other communities in the Cape and further south down to Palm Island, as many of our families do float between communities as well, given their families reside in some of these communities. So it's pretty healthy that we still can connect in that way from community to community. And but I think our biggest challenge is the economic side of things, where we're forever dependent on welfare being a main transaction here. So we've got a big job to do in terms of trying to turn around the generational welfare challenge and trying to create opportunities for our kids. And the best opportunities we can do for our kids is to continue to encourage them to go to school and finish off their schooling and get a taste of the TAFE colleges and the university sector, so that they're really in the economy.
I suppose where you've got children who are a little bit ambitious academically or even sporting wise, the challenge is to get them to a place where they can grow that potential. And it's like everything in North Queensland. If you really want the best education or the university, it's head down to University of Queensland. If you want to be if you're a bit of a sports person and you want to get ahead and get proper coaching and a chance to get into the real teams of that, you need to go south. And that's just a matter for all people in northern Queensland. Do you have any sort of agreements with, say, other southern schools or sporting clubs and that to sort of foster relations to develop potential?
Yeah, we would love to. I mean, that's pretty being ambitious because there's a lot of potential in all of our communities. Yarrabah has been fortunate that we do have some graduates that are coming out of the university and the trade training sector. I know we go through the expectation program at Cape York, and they've managed to get kids into private boarding schools down south. And then when you find that they go to boarding school, well, the next progression is either university or the trade training sector. So we do have some wins that we can celebrate here, and graduates. But I think you nailed it there. Whilst we don't want to insulate our kids just to education just in Yarrabah, we need to get them exposed to the greater world, and if it means sending them to a private boarding school down south or a really good state school, I think that's our long-term investment in economic development. Because that's the best tools in life, is to get your kids educated so they can explore the world. And Yarrabah is always going to be here, but if we can make these kids and get parental support as well and family support, I think that's the best thing we can do for them.
I think it's a thing fairly common with most parents, and that is that you always want your children to do better than yourself. And I remember when I was growing up, even in Perth and that, there were a lot of people who didn't really move away from the area, and then there were those people who sort of were ambitious to go to. When you're in Perth in the 50s, going to the big smoke of Melbourne and Sydney was a big aim, sort of thing, especially for if you, as soon as you could sort of leave mum and dad. And today, I mean, with my children, their education was focused on making them, giving the opportunity to be global citizens. So not only, so the world was their oyster, not just, the local area or the local state. My daughters have worked overseas in the United States, Switzerland and France. So I think that's one of the things that I suppose should be on offer to everyone, is not be so insular and look at the greater thing as being global citizens and sharing the opportunity that the world has to offer.
Exactly. Yeah. And if we can have a mechanism to support these kids and the parents, and to acknowledge that there is a bigger world out there, and as you mentioned, around them being a global citizen, well, our communities, our small communities where we live and work and play, will always be there. There's always, you can always come back home, but you get out there and roll your sleeves up and have a go, you'll enjoy it as well, and you can grow and you can develop and you can be a leader as well. And you can set the example that other kids that are back in community can look at and say, well, I wanna be like that particular person,
Yeah, well, you can always, there's always a possibility to become a doctor or an astronaut or anything these days, given the opportunity. But just on that subject, what's the sort of attendance rate at school in Yarrabah area, and how many children actually are schooled over in Cairns? Is it a bit of a mix? Do some people go to Cairns?
Yeah, there's a bit of a mix. We got a couple of hundred kids that go here, I think, at the primary and the secondary. P to 10 we go, then 11 and 12 we go over to Yarragon College or Gordonvale or Bentley Park, and a few of the schools around the southern corridors of Cairns. and then some of the other kids are on, some of the parents send them away to private boarding school down south. So the numbers fluctuate in terms of the attendance out here, up and down. But, I think we just have to continue to work hard, and give them the grounding that they need, because without education, it'll probably be tough, with literacy and numeracy, and it's a tool that you really need in life. And whilst we're trying to do our best in the education space, we have the external forces of welfare pulling against us as well, because it's hard for parents, especially young parents, to really engage with their children, because they haven't been given the grounding around education themselves. So it's a pretty complex situation, but I think there's providers that are coming in every day to try and work around that. But yeah, it's going to take a really long time. But if we can identify the potential, I mean, every kid's got potential, but those kids and those parents who are serious about getting their kids educated, well, we need to get behind them and support them as well.
I suppose some sort of arrangement with the schools sort of down in Victoria and Melbourne or South Australia, and that with scholarships probably wouldn't go astray either, to boost encouragement for people to sort of have the advantage of having scholarships and things paid for to get that grounding education for those ones with get up and go and potential.
Exactly. We're a bit fortunate that we do leverage off the Cape York Institute scholarship program, where some of our kids do access some of the support that and some of the initiatives that they do. And it's been very encouraging, because some of the Yarrabah students who have gone through that program have graduated, and we are seeing results there. But it would be good to have, a Yarrabah specific scholarship program here through government investment, so that we can identify those parents and those students who do want to excel and who do want to have a go, get up and roll their sleeves up and have a go out there and compete. But it's really setting their foundations up when you look at engaging and participating in the real economy. And I know I've been trying to work hard to work with the private boarding schools out there, but I think we really need some support or some investment around a private scholarship fund or a program here in Yarrabah to complement the work that Cape York has been doing. Plus also, I know Yalari does a good work, the Education Foundation. So there's some good initiatives out there, but tailoring it specifically for Yarrabah students, I think, would go a long way towards boosting the numbers.
The other thing that would be benefit to everyone in Northern Australia, if the federal government actually came into the realm of developing the North. I've heard since 2014, when the Abbott government did a white paper on developing the North. Then you had the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund, which was merely on my opinion, it was just useless, because it was just a loan facility. It didn't actually drive real investment. But do you think that's one thing that would improve the lot of everyone in Northern Australia, if the federal government actually just got off its butt and sort of looked at the potential of Northern Australia and started to help them realise that potential? Because if you look at Northern Australia, we've got a lot of minerals, we've got a lot of good land. We've got Northern Australia has 80% of the Australian mainland rainfall. Yet, water's an issue. I mean, how can it be a water issue when we've got 80% of the rainfall for mainland Australia. This is the lack of investment in dams and infrastructure that's holding us back, and we'd all benefit from that growth. And is that the sort of message you take down to Canberra when you go down there? That, well, develop the north. It's there to be developed.
Yeah, there's really potential in Northern Australia for a lot of things to happen. As you mentioned there, around land and water and economic opportunity. But I think how they structured the NAIF wasn't really suitable for many of our towns and cities and communities, because not many local governments, like Yarrabah Council is grant dependent, so we couldn't facilitate a loan through NAIF to explore any economic opportunity, So that NAIF program probably needed to change in terms of getting into the potential part of Australia for real high impact, meaningful projects to happen with a return as well. And it not necessarily be about physical infrastructure, but also the investment around education and health and some of the social and living conditions that we experience up here in tropical far north Queensland. And our water supply, as you mentioned, is we get monsoon up this way every year. So there's enough adequate water supply in our region to create, whether it's a food basket or a bowl up this end, for more of the agricultural sector to take off and provide a better quality of life for those communities that are remote and up in the top end in terms of whether it's food security or whether it's cost of living, So, yeah, I think, Canberra need to realise that, NAIF, whilst it may have good intended issues, it was pretty challenging for many of us to try and access.
I think one of the things too is Brisbane isn't much help either. I mean, Brisbane is generally, has been for the last 30 years, anti-dam, anti-water infrastructure, has wild rivers legislation. So it's fine to have those sort of so-called environmental credentials, but the thing is, our rivers up here, it's rush and bust. Like we have the monsoons, you have 2 or 3 months of high rainfall, very fast running rivers, and then as the season changes, it peters out, and then by the end of the season, before the next rain season, you're down to a dry creek bed. This is not the way to manage things. I mean, it's all very well leaving things up to nature, but humans do have a place on the landscape, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, governments are always going to be governments, whether it's this government or former governments, and they're always challenging Queensland or the Australian people around, what's best for communities and what's best for the country. But there's so much potential for us up here. Sometimes I think we're the forgotten north. And we really do find it hard to attract government support and high impact investment for our communities to really have a go at making things work.
Well, the other thing, North Queensland, Northern Australia has got the potential to grow the pie, and that's good for all Australians. But governments just don't seem to be focused on it. If they want to spend $5 to $12 billion on a cross-river rail that will never generate a dollar, they seem to be keen to do that, but they're not that keen to sort of put 5 billion into water projects in northern Queensland, which would help the whole population of northern Queensland, and the spin-off for Australia would be much better.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's always going to be a challenge with government. Maybe it's based on population, where the electorate is, and southeast corner must likely have more population than whether it's north, south, east, or west of the state. So it is pretty challenging, and getting government to consider really good projects up in the north. But I think we need to continue the fight, because at the end of the day, we're trying to, one is create an economy, but also improve the quality of life for many of our communities up in tropical North Queensland.
With Yarrabah and a lot of communities, they have I think it's a deed of trust in regards to holding the land. Do you think it's time for the governments and people to look at somehow converting the land you're on to free title, freehold, so individuals can own their own homes and their own plot of lands and those sort of things, and even have reasonable, not so much your area in regards, because it's fairly restricted in land mass, but out further in that, other communities could benefit from large-scale freehold holdings to attract investment.
Yeah, we have a restricted tenure system in many of our dockets which calls the inalienable freehold title, so which means we can't sell it off or convert it to freehold title. So there's a bit of give and take with that. Is under the Aboriginal Land Act, we can own our own homes with the transfer of social housing through a mechanism or a process, but also under the Aboriginal Land Act, we can explore the potential opportunity of converting inalienable freehold title to freehold title, but that's got to be with the blessing of the traditional owner group of the day, as well as the community. So yeah, it's a bit complex and a bit tricky in terms of conversion of inalienable title to freehold. But one day it might happen, or potentially it could happen. Not only to Yarrabah, but many of the other Doggett communities. Because we've got a closed market, so you're moving from a closed market to an open market, or an open economy. But that comes with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of really fair income consideration by First Nations people, whether they are happy to pursue those lines. But it is a mechanism to explore, one day, from moving from a closed market to an open market.
Yeah, well, I think the accumulation of personal wealth is important to everyone, regardless of their ethnic background or their culture or that. It's all very well being part of the community and sharing that. But the thing that makes people strive is building their own wealth and opportunities. So I'd really like to see that come into place in the coming years.
So the title deed is more communal, as opposed to tribal, individual wealth or private. So yeah, the title deed is more communal, but there's a consideration there of, native title is more communal. It's the land is vested in trust for all Aboriginal of the inhabitants. But one day they may explore, that individual wealth and wealth creation through privatisation. But at the moment, it's just communal, at this stage.
Going forward, there's a lot of talk in regards to the conditions of Indigenous people and that through closing the gap and moving towards the voice. the situation in regards to the flow down of money that's the taxpayer throws into the Indigenous affairs type thing. Do you have concerns about the flow down and how it just trickles down to communities like yourself, whereas from the top, there's tens of thousands of public services administering it. There's 3,000 or 4,000 NGOs and Indigenous community groups and things like that. And then you also, part of that funding also goes to people like universities and researchers and different arts and that. Do you see an issue with the flow down of the money that is put in by the taxpayer, and we need to sort of open the bottom of the funnel a bit so more actually flows to the people who need a hand up?
Yeah, you're on the money there, Bill, because I think rural, regional, and remote Australia has been always requesting that and Aboriginal people in Australia has always been accused of having billions of dollars invested in their communities, to make improvements. But when the money hits the communities, it's before it hits there, it's taken up in, as you mentioned, the bureaucracy.
I'll throw up a screen at the moment.
But all the other players.
I mean, this is the sort of fund we've got. We've got taxpayers up here chucking in somewhere towards $35 billion a year, but it's administered by thousands or even tens of thousands of federal and state public servants, and they're all on a fairly good wicket. Then there's all the groups that sort of in the line of assisting with Indigenous people of improving your life and that, but you probably never see 99% of those people. And then you've got academic research, universities, land council, and then at the bottom, all you got to get is a trickle. And I think that really needs to be one of the big aims to be fixed, because it's really horrendous, the small trickle down to the communities, I think.
Yeah, we've always been challenging with the elephant in the mass scenario where governments have all the power and we have nothing, and we've always been accused for many years that the 35 billion that's allocated to First Nations isn't really, where's all that money gone? But at the community level, we're always struggling, to make ends meet. And the machinery of government and other sectors, they always shortchange us,
Well, just in universities, there's hundreds, if not thousands, in the different universities who are, on their $250,000 a year, writing research papers on Indigenous, plights and all that sort of thing. Do you think we really need those people to keep telling the hard story? Do we need them maybe to get off their butt and live in the communities and help us out?
Yeah, no, well, we certainly need the investment go down to the grassroots community, because it's getting swallowed up in the other processes, And when you look at many of our communities around the country, they all tell the same story, and we Indigenous people always get tarnished that, where's the 35 billion that's gone in Indigenous affairs? We don't see anything happening at the community level. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are things that happen in our community, good things, but the trickle down of the investment is really challenging, and we need to get governments to really consider. And I know governments probably have that same challenge around the machinery of government, and all the.
Governments like big government and big organisations. That's the problem.
And all the administrative process,
I think one of the other problems is key performance indicators. I mean, I think there's a lot of these organisations that don't have those things in place. I mean, you'd be aware of the juvenile justice system and the juvenile crime and that, and all these NGOs that are set up to sort of provide resi care and things like that. You know, they're creaming off somewhere like, you know, $150,000 to $200,000 per child that they're looking after, but they're not getting too much on the results on the ground. I mean, it seems to be that a lot of flawed systems that are allowed to happen over the years to eat up all this money that should be getting down to the root cause and the households that need the help.
Yeah, well, you know, governments always react to the back end of crisis management, when a lot of the investment should be provided upstream, you know, at the early intervention stages, you know, but you'll always find that they're really putting a band-aid on this back end. And I call it the crisis management end, when they should be supporting communities early on, you know, because, you know, it works. I mean, early intervention and prevention will work with community if community own the programs and they design it. And then you'll find that at this back end, you know, they wouldn't have to spend millions of dollars at this back end, because
It's
you know,
problems not happening in the first place.
Yeah, whether it's healthcare, whether it's juvenile justice, or whether it's education, you know, got to go hard upstream first.
We've gone over the hour just about. Is there anything you'd like to sort of indicate that you'd like to see moving forward that would improve the lot of your community and Indigenous people in particular throughout Australia and Australia in general?
Yeah, well, the referendum's coming up in October this year, and a voice to Parliament. You know, I think given the polling that's going up and down for the next few months, you know, I really think that Australia needs to acknowledge the First Nations people as first Australians in the founding document, in the Constitution. Also include a voice, as well as a truth telling or a makarata. So voice, treaty, truth. And that's going to a referendum this year. So hopefully we'll get support. We don't have bipartisan support. It's been through the upper and the lower house there over the last few weeks. And I think it's now up to the Australian people. So we're asking the Australian people as First Nations to recognise us as First Nations, but also it's about representation to the Parliament and the executives about any matters or issues affecting First Nations. And it's about community control or self-management and self-determination for our people, because we know what's best, what's happening in our communities. We have the solutions. Help us help government to find those solutions, you know, because it's very important that we get this particular referendum over the line. I'm make no apology, I'm pro-voice, and it's very important for the nation to mature and start recognising First Nations people as first Australians, you know. And if we're going to have those mature discussions over the next few months, you know, I think Australia will not only be a good country, but it'll be a great country.
In regards to the voice, so much of the discussion is, you know, we don't know about exactly what it's going to look like and things like that. One of the things I would be concerned about is the makeup of the people running the voice, and there seems to be an awful lot of focus on people from the cities and the well-to-do. And I think there's only about 4 spots reserved for people in the communities on the governing body of that. Do you think there needs to be more focus on representation from the people who are actually in Central Australia and Northern Australia and in these communities, rather than leaving it up to the well-heeled, university-educated, high-paid, $600,000 a year people who sort of are pushing the agenda? Would you like to see some sort of information in regards to a setup how the regional people are going to get their voice in there compared to the Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane dwellers?
Yeah, well, if we look at Carmel Langton Report 2021, provided by or commissioned by the former coalition government, when former Minister White was in government, presented the co-designed voice report to his coalition members twice. They haven't read it, or they haven't endorsed it. But if we reflect on that co-design report of the Voice to Parliament, there was sort of guiding the design principles on terms of representation, how people would be elected. It could only be used as a guide, those design principles, but there's something like 35 regions throughout the country, and maybe 7 for Queensland. But if you look at those design principles, one of it is got to be a cultural authority who can speak on behalf of country, who transparency and accountability means that there'll be due diligence on any potential elected members. It's got to be community led. It's got to have representation from an elder, a youth, LGBTI community, as well as the disability sector. So it's a very comprehensive report, about 300 pages. And the design principles would mean that there's a bit of work done there to really consider who those potential leaders would be for each region around the state or the country. So I know the media talks a lot about it being a Canberra voice, but for far north Queensland or other regions throughout the state or country, is those communities will elect their own First Nation leader based on those design principles. But at the end of the day, should this referendum be successful, I'm hoping that they use those design principles, but governments will design it at the end of the day, what the model looks like. But there's been a fair amount of work done out there, and I think it's sometimes, the information that's provided through media, to call it a Canberra voice is really not fair. We do have smart intellectual academics, First Nations out there who are really articulating, the voice and the struggle to get a voice to government and the opposition. And, they're doing their best under these circumstances, but we just as fellow Australians, there's a lot of academics and smart people out there, but our First Nations leaders, whether it's lawyers or scholars, are doing a really good job, and it's each region and each community will elect their leaders. I mean, they know who's best based on those design principles. It would be good to elect them in their region as leaders, and that will hopefully feed into the national voice. So there's been a lot of work done over the last few years, and I think it can only be encouraging if we do get a successful outcome, is governments will design a model based on some of those design principles.
Well, most of us can only hope that it's not another big layer of bureaucracy at the top, and the funnel is still choked at the bottom. We'd hope that some good would come out of it, is stopping that absorption of money at the higher end and getting the money out at the bottom end, because if it doesn't achieve that, all it's going to achieve is having more bureaucrats and more public servants and more regulation with zero good outcomes unless we can do something about that funnel and that hole in the bottom where your money just drips out of. We want to see a flow.
And I forgot to mention that there are existing frameworks or structures there with, the local government body and the land councils and the health sector, or the peak bodies in health and education. So there are existing structures and bodies out there. My envisaging of a voice, a federal voice, would to complement those existing structures, but also to amplify the voices of these other bodies to government, so that the voices really make a difference at, like you're saying, at the community and at the grassroots level. And it will be challenging navigating around the machinery of government and all the process that we have to go through, or they have to go through. But one would hope that it doesn't create a new layer of bureaucratic machinery, because it will be challenging getting all that money back down to the community level.
Okay then. Look, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. That's really appreciated. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. If you could just stay on the line for a little bit, I'll introduce my next episode and just have a quick chat after, if that's all right with you.
Yep, no, easy, Bill.
Right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The next episode will be tomorrow night, and I'll be interviewing John Clark. John Clark is a forester, and we'll be talking about the logging bans in WA, where basically loggers have been completely locked out of native forests, and we're just letting a resource grow, die, rot, or be destroyed by wildfires, and completely failing to harvest the timber. So please join us again tomorrow night. Thank you.